Hello everybody, I hope you guys missed me because I miss myself all the time. I know this video is a week late, but it's not like we have a new chapter to go over, so what else am I gonna do? So do you guys remember when we thought that the Gorosei were like these super intelligent, manipulative, super conniving, evil endgame villains that were going to be super competent by the end? Well, it turns out that recently Oda has decided to go with the complete opposite of that vision. We have an elder complaining about Luffy's bounty poster, and he's complaining about the picture and he's also complaining about the D initial. So if they're worried about the picture of Luffy, that means that there's somebody in the world, there's a group of people in the world, or somebody in the world that would recognize Luffy as Nika, right? And therefore this group of people must have some information, some knowledge about the physical description of Nika, right? They must know what Nika looks like in order to look at Luffy's bounty poster and identify him as Nika. So I wonder who it is, like which group of people is that? I mean, the giants worship the sun, so maybe it's them. It could also be the fishmen, maybe, because slavery is part of their past, so maybe Nika helped them out in the past, and they remembered his image. Regardless, though, the Gorosei is also yelling that they should remove the D initial from Luffy's bounty poster. Ah yes, that's a really good idea. Just change the name of a guy who has had a bounty poster in circulation for over 2 years. People have had over 2 years to read Monkey D. Luffy in the bounty poster, and now all of a sudden you want to take that D initial away. Go ahead. I'm sure people will forget what Luffy's name is. It seems like Oda has turned the Gorosei into absolute clowns recently. And this is kind of what the chapter does. It introduces a new era. The era of clowns. No, but seriously, I think that if we're really honest with ourselves, and if we really look at what's going on at the core in this, the Gorosei looking incompetent is really happening because the Gomu Gomu no Mi was turned into the Nika Nika no Mi, and that was not planned out. That is the main issue. The main issue is that Oda wanted to find a way of Luffy defeating Kaido, and Oda did not do as much planning as he usually does. He didn't plan it like, super ahead of time. And so because of that, now we're having all these issues with the Gorosei looking like clowns. Even Oda admits that he didn't plan things as well as he should have. That's why he's taking a break right now, so that he can plan and make adjustments for the final saga, so that stuff like this doesn't happen again. And I am genuinely grateful about that. Now apparently the guy who leaked the picture was the guy from ZP0 that was left, called Guernica. And Guernica is actually the name of a painting by Picasso, so that's it right here. And somebody on Worst Gen actually pointed out that Guernica is actually a member of the Long Arm tribe. Because if you look at his arms in this shot, you can clearly see that they're double jointed, just like Apu's. So it looks like Apu has a contact within the world government, within ZP0, that's actually responsible for getting those pictures to Morgans. And Apu is actually becoming one of my favorite supernovas, because, like, this guy, he can get away with anything. Like, there are no consequences to all the backstabbing Apu does. He's betraying people left and right, he has contacts in the newspaper, he has contacts in ZP0, he's running around doing whatever he wants. Apu's the type of guy that can cheat on his girl multiple times and the girlfriend still takes him back. He really is a great Pokemon to have in your party. According to Morgans, the Big Mom Pirates still have a role to play, which I'm glad that plot point wasn't dropped just out of nowhere. So I guess we'll see what happens with them. And as the news makes its way around the world, we see a giant picture of Sabo in one of these town squares, which, given what Chad Bull says at the end of the chapter, that the outside world is a mess right now, I'm guessing that means that the revolutionaries are now involved in some kind of conflict against the government or the Marines. Now, the consensus in terms of the bounty amount seems to be that Luffy's bounty is too low and Kid and Law's bounties are too high. So Luffy's bounty actually does not reach Shanks' bounty, which was the thing that I was the most curious about, because I thought, well, it would be a good idea to have like Luffy be equal to Shanks or like surpass Shanks' bounty, and that would be a good excuse for them to meet. Shanks acknowledging that Luffy has become a great pirate. So with that in mind, I think that maybe there's like 2 jumps left for Luffy's bounty. The next one would probably be like, again, around Shanks' amount. And then the final one, the one like that goes into the end of series, would be the one that surpasses Roger's. So we'll probably get Luffy's final bounty that surpasses Roger's near the end of the series or during the epilogue. Now, I do think that Kid and Law's bounties raise some questions. I don't necessarily have an issue with Law's too much, because just his devil fruit alone, the Opi Opi no Mi, is worth 5 billion. So if somebody were to kill Law and take away his fruit, that's 5 billion right there. So you can argue that the inflation kind of makes sense for him. Kid, however, doesn't make sense to me. Before Wano, Kid had a lower bounty than Law. Law was 500 million, and Kid's was 470 mil. So from 470 mil to 3 billion, that is a 538% increase on the value on Kid's Bounty. And as far as we know, the Jiki Jiki no Mi doesn't have a market value that's as high as the Opi Opi no Mi. But then again, maybe Oda will add more information about that in the future. Now, I know some people are arguing that the government is trying to intentionally artificially inflate Kid and Law's bounties, because that way they can hide Luffy's threat level a little bit more. By giving more attention to Kid and Law, you can use Kid and Law as distractions and take away some of the attention from Luffy. And influence the narrative that way. And I would believe that, except the chapter literally opens up with the Gorosei admitting that they had no chance to manipulate the narrative this time. The guy said they didn't have the opportunity to approve what was being published. So how can the government be manipulating the narrative and then also not manipulating it at the same time? I do think that at the end of the day, though, these bounties are a result of laziness more than incompetence, because as people in the community have already pointed out, the people responsible for these numbers ended up adding Big Mom's bounty to Kaido's bounty, and then just divided by 3. Now, I also think it's very intentional that we did not get the rest of the Straw Hat bounties in this chapter, and the reason for that is because I think we're going to get the bounty posters for the rest of the crew along with Yamato's bounty poster, similar to what happened in Postenius Lobby in Water 7. If you remember, Frankie, who had not joined the crew at that point, received a bounty, and so in that very same chapter, we got the bounty for Frankie as well as for everybody else in the crew. And then you had the Frankie family asking Luffy to take Frankie out to sea with him. So I'm pretty sure that that's going to happen with Yamato. We're going to get Yamato's bounty. I've already said this before, but I think Yamato's bounty is going to be the exact same bounty that Odin had. They will both have the same amount, so we'll get to see what Odin's bounty was as well, simultaneously with Yamato's, and then that chapter will officially answer the question of whether or not Yamato's joining the crew. I kind of enjoyed the mother and father dynamic between Robin and Jinbei in this chapter. So after Jinbei joined the crew, Oda kind of amended like a statement in an SBS and said that like if the Straw Hat crew were a family, then Jinbei would be the dad and Robin would be the mom. And they're the only 2 Straw Hats in this chapter that get their own like little individual side quest sections. So it's like, where's dad? Oh, he's over there at the buffet. Dad being dad. And where is mom? Well, mom went to go solve a puzzle with one of her weird freaking notebooks that nobody understands but her. And then of course we also have the children that went off to go get high on sugar. Oh, and the Brook is grandpa. I forgot he's the grandfather of the crew. So grandpa in this case is a little bit busy because he's playing a song alongside a woman who may or may not be a prostitute. Then we go to the Pluton section of the chapter. And so, to the surprise of almost nobody, it turns out that Tenguyama Hitetsu is in fact Kozuki Sukiyaki, Odin's father. And I'm looking at his room and, you know, there's a bunch of swords there. Like there's a sword, sort of like a sword display behind Robin. There's some swords there. So I'm like, wow, you know, I could have sworn that Kawamatsu and Onimaru were busy collecting weapons. Pretty sure Sukiyaki could have come in handy in that situation. So yeah, this is the room that Brook went in, and Brook did say that there was a poneglyph there, but that it was not a road poneglyph. It's not a red one, and this chapter confirms that to be true. It's just like a normal poneglyph. Now, what's also interesting about this scene is that currently, as far as we know, these are the only 2 living people in the One Piece world capable of deciphering the poneglyphs. Because the Kozuki clan sort of would pass down the language to the next generation, except it actually died with Odin because Odin never got to teach Momonosuke how to read and write the language. But Sukiyaki does know, and so technically speaking, other pirate groups can just take Sukiyaki instead of Robin. They can kidnap Sukiyaki. Sukiyaki has a death wish anyway, so I feel like it could be likely that he finds himself in a scenario where he gets kidnapped and he's actually forced, right, or threatened to read the poneglyphs, and in order to redeem himself, in order to regain back his honor, he actually chooses death, and that's how he dies. Now, a question you might have would be like, how would other pirates find out about Sukiyaki in the first place? How would they know that he's capable of reading the poneglyphs in the first place? And so what's interesting is that he says that the Scabbards might know about his identity already. So if the Scabbards know, what if Kanjiro knew about him, and Kanjiro actually told somebody about Sukiyaki? Now, the thing about Pluton being in Wano actually works to explain a lot of things to me. The first thing is that it kind of explains why Kaido chose Wano in the first place. Because during the Kaido flashback, we find out that Higurashi is the one who convinces Kaido to go to Wano in the first place, and she tells him that weapons are what speak loudest in the world we live in, and I've got a deal you'll want to hear about. So she was probably the one who told him about Pluton being in Wano in the first place. There's also a lot of themes in Wano that revolve around death. Kaido says that death is what completes a person. The samurai want to be able to find an honorable death. The name Enma is the king of the underworld, the king of hell, which is what Zoro says that he wants to become. And so the name Pluton in Roman mythology is the equivalent of Hades, right? The ruler of hell, god of death. In Kaido's introduction, in addition to wanting to die, he says he wants to start the greatest war the world has ever seen, which, if we're being honest, he never got to do that, but it makes sense why he thought he could do that if he knew that Pluton was in Wano. Because Pluton as a weapon is supposed to be an island buster. Now the problem with Kaido is that he never figured out how to revive the weapon in the first place. And the reason he never figured it out is because you need 2 keys to be able to activate Pluton. The first key, I think, is Zunisha, and that's why the Gorosei last chapter were asking, is the elephant gone? Because Zunisha needs to do something in order to revive the weapon. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the crime that the elephant committed all those years ago has to do with activating Pluton in the first place, and then Pluton was used to commit genocide, to destroy a group of people like the Lunarians or something. And that's why Zunisha is being punished, because it activated the weapon all those years ago. And so because Zunisha messed up back then, the second key in the present to activating Pluton would be the inheritor of the Kozuki clan, which in this case would be Momonosuke, right? Because Momonosuke is the only person that can order Zunisha. So I think somebody said, like, yeah, this elephant was just, what they did was unforgivable, so now the Kozuki clan is the only one that can tell this elephant what to do. So in this case, it'll be up to Momonosuke to decide when and where to revive the weapon. And I think that's why Momonosuke told Zunisha, yeah, we're not opening the borders just now, because that would require, like, maybe activating Pluton, and we're not ready. The final war hasn't started yet, so we can't do this just now. And so this also kind of explains why Momonosuke, after reading his dad's journal, actually comes to the conclusion that it's very important that he doesn't die, because he's the only one that can actually reactivate the weapon. Now, if I'd had to guess, I'd definitely say that Pluton's whereabouts in Wano definitely has something to do with the 2 volcanoes that we've seen. So the first one would be Mount Fuji, and then the second one would be the underwater volcano that Kaido found his way into. Another reason for why I think that Pluton has to do with the volcanoes is because during Frankie's flashback, one of the lessons that Tom tries to teach Frankie when he's younger is that the things you make, the ships Frankie was making, Tom told Frankie, they're not good or bad. It depends on how you use them. So, for example, a tool is just a tool. It depends on what you do with it. For example, it would be like a pen, right? A pen, you can use it to poke somebody's eyes out, or you can use it to write a love letter. And so with that theme in mind, and I've said this before, I said this a long time ago, I think Pluton has the ability not only to destroy islands, but to create them as well. In fact, I think all of the ancient weapons have that capacity. Because, like, for example, Poseidon, Shirahoshi, you can use the Sea Kings to block pathways, right? To stop people from going to one place. But you can also use the Sea Kings to create new pathways in the ocean as well. So when it comes to Pluton and the volcanoes, it's like, what can volcanoes do? They can create, but they can also destroy. In Skypiea, we learned that sky islands are actually created by the molecules that come out of volcanoes, the pyrobloin, because the pyrobloin mixes with the moisture in the atmosphere, and that's what allows for sky islands to be created. So again, it's about creation, but then volcanoes can also destroy. And then at the same time, you know, when the lava cools, when the magma ends up cooling, you can create new land. So I do think that Pluton has to be connected with those volcanoes, and especially because if you remember, Frankie knows about Pluton, he had the blueprints for the weapon. It's very likely that he might rebuild Pluton at some point in the future because of his knowledge. But then also in Zou, Frankie says that he'll make a weapon to defeat Kaido. And up until this point, that comment hasn't really paid off, unless we can take it as some sort of foreshadowing for Frankie saying that the thing that's going to end up destroying Kaido is actually Pluton. And therefore it makes sense that if Kaido actually fell into the magma, right, into this river of lava, that maybe that river of lava is actually connected to Pluton, and ultimately Pluton is actually the one that ended up defeating Kaido in a way. It just makes more sense for Kaido as a character to meet his end by falling into an ancient weapon that has been lying dormant underneath the surface of Wano, especially when that ancient weapon is also known as the God of Death. One more thing I want to add here is that in chapter 910, when the Straw Hats arrive in Wano, they get to the waterfall, and then Nami says, how is there a waterfall at the end of a river? How does the flow work? Because typically, right, you would have the river, and the current of that river would actually lead you into the fall. But in Wano's case, the river actually leads you to the base of the fall instead. So there's something very weird about the flow of water around Wano's borders. So there could be like a gravitational pull that's being created by the weapon, even though the weapon is technically asleep. And we also don't know what creates the whirlpools around Wano's borders as well. So Pluton might be responsible for that. We move on to get to the introduction of the final Admiral of the story, who is also based on a famous Japanese actor who also appeared in a Japanese movie that almost nobody knew anything about until this chapter came out. Now, unlike Fujitora, who went all the way to Dressrosa to stall some people here and there and to try to pretend to push a birdcage, Chadbull is actually taking care of business. He's not only making Wano green again, but he's also pulling a Doflamingo and accomplishing something that 2 Yonko failed to do throughout the entire raid, which is to kill people. Now, apparently King and Queen tried to do something against the Admiral, because he does say, "I warned you not to test me," and it's been 7 days since they were defeated, right? So if this is how the commanders look, I'm kind of curious, like, what happened to Kaido and Big Mom? Where are they? Because the commanders were trying to fight an admiral, at least, after 7 days. Now, I hope Green Bull didn't kill King, because King is a Lunarian, and Lunarians are super valuable for the government. Lunarians are also supposed to be super durable and stuff. That's why King was captured and sent to Punk Hazard to be experimented on, so that they could test his body for his durability. However, that durability actually decreases if their flame isn't on their back. And we clearly see that King's fire has gone out in that panel. Now, given that Queen is thinner now, that means he'll be a lot more popular, and he will also be a lot more dead. Now, after Green Bull drinks some sake straight out of the barrel, he makes a comment about its quality, which takes us back to his introduction where Fujitora actually thanks him for his food. And so these two things combined pretty much implies that Green Bull has some degree of knowledge when it comes to cooking, or like cuisine, fine dining, essentially. And so this, coupled with the comment about wanting to be fed by a beautiful woman, pretty much has fans speculating that Green Bull will be Sanji's future opponent. Then again, he could also turn out to be Zoro's opponent, because he's so much like Sanji. Aramaki also carries a sword with him as well, so again, likely candidate to be Zoro's future opponent. I definitely think it's intentional, though. I think it's Oda's way of, making the Sanji versus Zoro debate continue, in terms of the Sanji fans and Zoro fans debating about who's going to actually get to fight Green Bull. It actually reminds me of the King situation, where to me it was always pretty obvious that Zoro was going to end up fighting King, but then Oda decided to throw a curveball before the fight by having Sanji clash with King, and that sparked a lot of discussion. So I can see that happening with Green Bull as well in the future. Now, ever since the Zoro versus King fight, near the ending of the fights in Wano, Oda has made it very, very obvious that he's doing a lot of stuff to hype up Akainu. Starting with King having this flame magma dragon thing, and then Kaido's final form, also looking like a dragon made out of magma, and then Kaido falling into a volcano that erupted. It's all there to hype up Akainu, and Green Bull has a line in this chapter that is no different, because he's basically saying that he's doing this because he wants to be praised by Sakazuki.
Excellent work, Yonko. Go on.
It's like the law of King's Haki, right? The law of King's Haki states that the more Chads you have under you that have King's Haki, the chattier you are. So what does it say about Akainu that he has somebody like Green Bull following his orders? Anyway, we go to the party, and even though I don't appreciate Luffy's line about him not wanting to be a hero, because despite that, it's so obvious that Oda wants to make Luffy the hero of the story, so it feels like a contradiction in and of itself. It's kind of like when you're part of a family and you know who the favorite child is, and then you ask them about it and they're like, "Oh, I'm not the favorite." It's like, no, everybody knows you're the favorite. Despite that, though, from an artistic standpoint, that panel with Kid and Luffy together under the fireworks with the kanpai is easily one of my favorite panels of this entire arc. The way the lighting is handled in that spread is just absolutely amazing. We get the Straw Hats there as well, some samurai. Apparently Otsuru did not die, and so she was able to reunite with her husband off screen. We get a shot of Tama there as well, with her slaves. It's also interesting that Oda decided to include Carrot with the minks, as opposed to including her with the Straw Hats. I think that's a pretty big hint of where this is going. It seems to me like it's obvious that Carrot is going to decide to stay with the minks after this. Finally, Oda decides to close up the chapter by referencing two things that ended up affecting the quality of the writing of the series recently. The first one is the introduction of the Nika Nika no Mi, because Luffy's eyes bug out as he reads the newspaper, which is what happened to him when he activated Gear 5th. And then the second thing is Oda deciding not to take the Yonko system seriously anymore. Now, what's interesting about Oda making Buggy part of the Yonko is that we already had a clown that was part of the Yonko. And that's the point here, is that the Yonko system for me pretty much died way before Buggy was revealed to be an emperor. The Yonko system died by the way that Big Mom and Kaido were handled in this arc. I really can't say the phrase Yonko level with a straight face anymore. Like after Wano, what does that even mean? What makes it worse is that it's my own fault for buying into these concepts in the first place. So now I have to really think hard about what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And who I want to be. Now, given the fact that Buggy is referred to as the genius gesture, that heavily implies that the reason for why he became a Yonko in the first place is because he was able to successfully pull off a top-tier level scheme. And some people are suggesting that it's because he was able to get all of the remaining Shichibukai under his belt somehow. And so now he's like the leader / manager of all of them. Other people are also suggesting that it was actually Shanks who's responsible for Buggy's title, because maybe he was the pirate that Shanks wanted to talk to the Gorosei about. Except the chronology of that theory doesn't really add up, because the Shichibukai system was revoked after the Reverie, after this meeting took place. So if that's the case, why would the Marines show up at Buggy's Island after the Reverie to try and capture him as a Shichibukai if he was going to be recognized as a Yonko because Shanks hyped him up? So yeah, I definitely think that Buggy becoming a Yonko has definitely more to do with like an accident or a scheme that happened after he was supposed to be captured by the Marines. Then again, the level of competency of the world government has recently left a lot to be desired, so who knows. Now, just to give you some perspective in terms of what it means that Buggy became a Yonko, bounty-wise, right? So the lowest bounty for a known Yonko would be Luffy's bounty after Whole Cake Island, when he started being called the 5th Emperor, right? And so Luffy had a bounty of 1.5 billion back then. And so let's say for argument's sake that the minimum bounty amount that you can have to be called a Yonko in the newspaper is 1.5 billion. And so Buggy's only known bounty in the series has been of 15 million. And so let's say that he's now worth 1.5 billion. So from 15 million to 1.5 billion, that is a 9,900% increase on Buggy's bounty. So I want to put that percentage into perspective. So imagine that one day you go to a restaurant and let's say that you get a burger, right? Let's say you get a burger, some fries, and a Coke, and a drink. And all of that costs you $10. So if it's $10, you pay for your meal and then you leave, all right? And then you come back the next day. And the next day you get the exact same thing. You get the burger, the fries, and the Coke. However, because of the Buggy 9,900% increase on this meal, instead of paying $10, this meal, the exact same meal that you had yesterday, is now going to cost you $1,000. By the way, did you know that if you look at the cover for volume 25, Oda actually foreshadowed everybody already knows this, I'm way too late. One of the Road to Laughtale booklets was released, and it honestly didn't have a whole lot of new information. There's only two things that really stood out. The first one is that the scabbards initially, according to the sketchbook, the scabbards were supposed to be only a group of 4 in the beginning. Like Oda had conceptualized them to be a group of 4, but then he kept going and he turned them into a group of 7, and then of course ultimately he ended up with 9. So just know that in an alternate universe, Oda actually created 4 scabbards instead of 9. And because of that, because we only had 4 scabbards to focus on during the raid, Oda actually got to focus more on the Straw Hats, the Supernova, and maybe he got to flesh out Kaido a little bit more as a character. But oh well, at least in this universe, Usopp got to ride a giraffe. I think for the most part, most of us can agree that it's a great thing that Oda's taking a break. And I think it speaks to his level of self-awareness that he realized, like, I need to get out of the office, you know, I need a breath of fresh air. I can't keep doing this. He went from having 4 to 9 scabbards, and on average, the typical reader only ended up caring about 3. And then the last bit of news, according to the Road to Laughtale booklet, is that the Final Road Poneglyph, right? It says here that it's located in an island that the Straw Hats have not been to yet. And so the booklet actually gives you some options as to where it could be. The first option, according to the booklet, is Elbaf. That's the first option. It could be in Elbaf. The second one is Vera, which is an island that we know literally nothing about except that Nami has actually read about it in the newspaper. So that's Vera. And then the third option is Hashinosu, or Full Island, which is where the Rocks Pirates were formed, but it's also currently the headquarters for Blackbeard. So I feel like that's where it has to be, just because I think the Atom Tree is in Elbaf, and we don't know anything about Vera, so it just seems kind of obscure. But then also, like in Fishman Island, during the Odin flashback, we saw that the Road Poneglyph was in Fishman Island, and we know that Whitebeard was in charge of that territory. So Blackbeard was part of Whitebeard's crew, so he must have seen that poneglyph, and I'm pretty sure that he maybe stole it after Whitebeard's death. So maybe he took it to his base. Now, I kind of mentioned this in the last review, but for me, the plot points that are left in order for the curtain to fall and in order for Act 3 of Wano to end are the following. So the first one is, where is the Road Poneglyph? Where is the red poneglyph in Wano hidden? That's one. Second thing is Zoro going to Ryuma's grave, maybe getting some lineage for Zoro, some history about the Shimotsuki, something like that. That would be the second one. The third one is the Straw Hat Bounties, the rest of the Straw Hat Bounties. What are they? What are the values? The fourth one is Yamato going to be joining or not? That has to be resolved here. The fifth one would be, what happened to Kaido and Big Mom? That's also something that needs to be addressed, I think. Just because we saw what happened to King and Queen in this, so it's obvious that Oda's going to answer that question as well. The sixth one is, and this is the one that I'm not really sure about, but the sixth one would be, is Chopper going to cure the citizens of Wano? Is he going to come up with a cure for the Smiley effect, right? So that's the sixth one. And then the final plot point kind of goes along with how this chapter ends, which is with Green Bull making his way over to the Flower Capital to confront the pirates. Now, I don't think there's going to be a full-on fight or anything like that, because at this point, Green Bull is walking into a place where he's going to find Luffy, Kid, Zoro, and Sanji, and those four are pretty tough. They should be able to take on an Admiral together, no problem. In fact, I think it's pretty obvious that at this point, Sun God Nika should be able to take on an Admiral. So at this point, I'm actually betting that it's going to be some kind of very tense conversation, and they're going to come up with an agreement, and they're going to be able to part ways. And so just like Fujitora in Dressrosa, he says he's going to turn a blind eye. Something like that, They're going to come up with some kind of an arrangement, and then Wano is going to be restored. That's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I thought the chapter was sort of a good endpoint for Oda to take a break on. And you can follow me on Instagram if you want to, at Team7Mage. That's my Instagram. Take care. Thank you for all of your support. Thank you so much for waiting. I know I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I tried my best to give you a review that was worthwhile. Take care. Thanks again. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.